Hello, and welcome to a topic lecture on the March 2023 public forum debate topic, The Republic of India Should Sign the Artemis Accords. My name is Jet Smith, and I'm the head coach at Highland High School in Pocatello, Idaho, and the goal of this video is to increase access to free resources to improving speech and debate. Now, this topic is a pretty important one as it is national qualifiers topics for many districts, as well as the state championship topic for many districts. So with that being said, this video is going to cover three different main things. First is a resolutionary analysis, second is pro arguments, and third is con arguments before sharing some final thoughts. First, let's discuss the resolution. What exactly is this topic all about? And we're going to discuss that in a few main ways. Those are trichotomy, definitions, background, core controversy, and stakeholders. So first, what type of topic is it? Second, what do the different words really mean? Third, what has happened recently and in the past that shapes our understanding of the topic? What are we really discussing here? What's the biggest issue? And then who is affected by the topic's outcome? So first on trichotomy, is this a resolution, a question of fact, value, or policy? Again, the wording is the Republic of India should sign the Artemis Accords. Policy topics say that an actor should action, so it's pretty clear that this is a policy topic, which means that the role of the judge is to kind of weigh the comparative advantages of an action. So the judge might be either somebody in the Artemis program, or more likely, the judge could be representing or role-playing as the government of the Republic of India, because that's who would be making this decision. Next, we have definitions, and that is how can or should the resolution's key terms be interpreted. So again, the wording of the topic, the Republic of India should sign the Artemis Accords. First, the Republic of India. No, I would not include a definition of this in your case. This is just for your own understanding. India is a South Asian country. It is currently the second most populated country in the world and has the third highest GDP in the world. Almost 1.4 billion people live there, which is just an insane amount of people when you think of a country like the United States. Second, we have the word sign, which replaced the word ratify. When the topic was originally released, it was the Republic of India should ratify the Artemis Accords. So to sign, it means to write one's signature as a token of agreement, obligation, or receipt, according to dictionary.com, whereas ratify means to conform by expressing consent, approval, or formal sanction. So the NSDA changed the word from ratify to sign based on recommendations from a few different organizations to, and this is directly from their website, quote, better imply the Artemis Accords are not legally binding, close quote. So the Accords are a set of principles or agreements, which is what we'll talk about next. The Artemis Accords are a set of 13 statements that lay out common practices, principles, guidelines, for the safe exploration of the moon and beyond, meant to be signed by different countries, according to space.com. So signing the Artemis Accords gets you into NASA's Artemis program, which is trying to get humans back on the moon by 2025. The provisions in the 13 statements include commitments to all of these things that I have listed here, which you can read short descriptions of from NASA's website from that first link, and you should read the actual accords on that second link. They're about 18 pages long, including the title page and the table of contents. Next, background. What motivated this topic's existence? What has gone on recently that will shape your understanding of it? So first of all, you need to know the Outer Space Treaty. So the Outer Space Treaty was a treaty on principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. That is the official name of the treaty. Now, this treaty forms the basis of all international space law and is decades old. It prohibits nuclear weapons in space. It limits celestial bodies' purposes to peaceful ones. It outlaws claiming sovereignty over outer space territory and more. So another thing to note is about the space programs of great powers, throwback to the November-December great power competition topic. But what are the largest nations in the world space programs like? Well, the US, their agency is called NASA, and it's the largest space agency in the world, and it has over a $20 billion annual budget. The People's Republic of China, their agency is called the CNSA. It is the second largest, and it has a little over half of the US's budget for NASA, so a little over $11 billion annually. The third largest is way smaller than both of those, and that is the Russian Federation. And its agency is called Roscosmos, and it is the third largest. Technically, there are private companies that are larger than Russia, I believe, and European countries technically share a space agency as well that is larger. But as far as single country government-based space agencies, Russia is the third largest. The Republic of India in outer space is the fourth largest nation when it comes to having a space agency. Its agency is called the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, and its budget is over $2 billion annually. They have launched a lot of lunar exploration missions, the next of which is Chandrayaan-3, which is set to launch later this year. They also have the most cost-efficient space program in the world, or pretty near it, and they recently tested and launched an anti-satellite weapon, or ASAT, in 2019, which upset a lot of different nations because it created some space debris. But the US, China, and Russia also possess and have tested ASATs. Additionally, they opened up their space industry to not just be public, but also private in 2021. So, additionally, about the Artemis Accords themselves, which is between the US and many of its allies, it is a non-binding multilateral agreement with the US and others participating in NASA's Artemis program. 23 countries have signed from 6 different continents, but Russia, India, and China have not. Originally, it was signed by just 8 countries, including the United States, obviously, on October 13th, 2020. And the goal that they state pretty much everywhere, if you look at their website, if you look at their press releases, is they want to get the first woman and person of color to the moon by 2025. Meanwhile, another organization which has a similar goal but is smaller in stature and is opposed to the Artemis Accords is the International Lunar Research Station project, which is from Russia and China. It was announced in 2021 as a joint project between the two countries. They don't have an official date for when they want to get people on the moon. And it is meant to counter the Artemis program, allegedly, but no other country has joined China and Russia in this ILRS. Now, the strength of Russia's space program has also been decreasing in recent years, especially because of Ukraine. They're not really focused on space as much. Meanwhile, China has been getting much stronger. So India, on the other hand, has not signed up with either major group yet, and they have a long history of cooperation with Russia in outer space and a more recent history of cooperation with the United States in outer space. They also have their own domestic lunar exploration goals, like we talked about on the previous slide. Now let's look at the core controversy. What are the main issues brought into question by the topic? The two issues really are, one, is India better off with the Artemis Accords? And 2, are the Artemis Accords that good in the first place? So if the first question is India better off explicitly siding with the US in outer space or not? If the answer is yes, you should vote pro. If the answer is no, you should vote con. And second of all, are the Artemis Accords a positive step forward in outer space activity? If the answer is yes, vote pro. If the answer is no, vote con. So if you think of it in those terms of, is Artemis good for India and is Artemis good for the world? And if the answers to both of those questions are yes, then the judge should probably vote pro. And if the answers to those questions are no, then the judge should probably vote con. Who is most affected by the resolution's outcome? That's our last point under resolutionary analysis. We have to look at our stakeholders. There are 4 main groups under this resolution, and those are Indian citizens, politicians, and corporations, who are arguably the most important stakeholders. You also have to look at Russia and China because they would be affected by India's decision, and you'd also want to look at the United States along with other signatory nations of the Artemis Accords, and then also maybe aliens, but probably not. So now let's talk about pro arguments. Why India should sign the Artemis Accords. I have 10 arguments that you could turn into contentions or that you could combine and move around. So the first one is all about China's rise as a global power. The thesis of the argument is that India should sign the Artemis Accords to hinder China's rise as a global power in outer space. So uniqueness, link, and impact is the basic structure of a contention and public forum debate. Uniqueness, especially on a policy topic, is what's happening now. Link is how would the topic change it, and impact is why would it matter. So all of your arguments should have these 3 things. So uniqueness, in the current world, China is quickly becoming the world's leading power in outer space, but India, by signing the Artemis Accord, can give the Accords greater legitimacy and weaken China by removing one of their most likely lunar partners and giving legitimacy to a competing program that they are not a part of. The impact, or why we care, is that we can slow China's rise as the power, or even stop their rise to being, the #1 power in outer space, which is going to be crucial to preventing things like authoritarianism and conflict in outer space. Something you're going to notice on all of these slides is that I'm making really big claims and I'm not really telling you the why. All this is the claim for all three of those things. It's your job to find the warrant or the reason why, along with the evidence to back these three claims up. Second pro argument idea is about improving US and India relations. Now, India should sign the Artemis Accords to strengthen its ties with the United States, is the thesis of this argument. So, the United States and India have decently close relations, but they definitely could be closer. Luckily, by signing the Artemis Accords, that would improve India's relationship with the United States, and strong US India relations are essential for a whole bunch of different reasons, mostly to bolster trade and create peace between the two nations. Third of all, we have international consensus. The thesis of the argument is that India should sign the Artemis Accords to bolster their widespread international acceptance. India is the last major spacefaring nation that is allied with the United States not to sign the Artemis Accords. But by signing the Accords, India gives them legitimacy and believability, which also pressures China, Russia, and other countries that haven't signed on to at least follow its standards because they're coming just internationally accepted. And the impact is that you can basically just take whatever principle from the Artemis Accords that you really like and that you think internationally and globally should be followed, and you say that India will help build consensus on that issue, which is important because blah, blah, blah. Fourth pro argument area is about increasing investment. Thesis is that India should sign the Artemis Accords to invite greater foreign and domestic funding of its space sector. Right now, India's space sector lacks the money it needs to thrive from government spending and from foreign investment. You can see that India's space agency is a tenth of the funding that the United States is. But by signing the accords, that will spotlight India's private and public space organizations, bringing them into contact with investors as well as just kind of into the spotlight for a little bit. And by doing that, they are likely to get more investment, and investing in the space sector in India will increase their technological innovation as well as create jobs for the country. Fifth, we have lunar resource access. Thesis is that India should sign the Artemis Accords to ensure its ability to gain valuable materials from the moon. So right now, India's economy needs more capital, more resources, and more rare earth minerals in particular. But by signing the Artemis Accords, India will be able to be set up for the future when resource mining on the moon, on asteroids, and potentially even on other planets becomes possible and profitable. And those lunar resources will definitely improve India's economy and help fight climate change. Sixth argument idea is about mitigating space debris. And if you debated or were around for last year's Lincoln Douglas topic in January, February, I believe, the topic was all about the appropriation of outer space being unjust, so this should sound familiar. The thesis is that India should sign the Artemis Accords to help fight the growing problem of orbital trash. So right now, space debris is threatening India, and they are behind on mitigating it. It's also threatening pretty much everywhere in the world by potentiating a real danger to satellites. Meanwhile, the link is that India signing the accords will commit them alongside other nations to clean up and prevent creating more space debris. And there are a whole bunch of different impacts to space debris because satellites are so important. You can talk about billions in economic damage, disrupting military communications, and even harming the ability to track climate change. Seventh argument area for the pro side is about national security for India. So you say that India should sign the Artemis Accords to bolster its defenses in outer space. India is currently facing several security threats in outer space, especially from China, because of kind of rocky relations there. But India signing the accords will commit them to peaceful space exploration so that they will not behave aggressively in outer space. And also, it kind of brings them into the fold in this group of all these other countries that are committed to peace as well. Meanwhile, the impact is that you will be able to better avoid interstellar war, either between India and China or India and other parties, or just across any nation. And that interstellar war would cause billions of dollars in damages and likely cost thousands of lives. Eighth pro argument area is about strengthening lunar exploration. So this says that India should sign the Artemis Accords to improve the program's ability to get humans on the moon. So the uniqueness or the status quo currently, the Artemis program wants to get people back on the moon by 2025, in particular, the first woman and the first person of color. Note as well that India signing the accords will allow them to help other signatory nations achieve crewed space travel because India has a whole bunch of stuff that it specializes in. So they are good at building smaller rockets. They're really good at being cost efficient, and they can bring scientific discoveries to other nations. Now, getting to the moon faster or in general is important because it will foster innovation, provide crucial resources, and help China beat China and Russia in outer space. Any reason why the Artemis Accords are good, this argument basically says India will help us do it better than the Artemis program would be able to do without them. Ninth, you have strengthening ties or strengthening the Quad alliance. So India should sign the Artemis Accords to better its relationships with the United States, Australia, and Japan. Those four countries represent the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, and in the status quo, India is the only member of the Quad that has not signed the Artemis Accords yet. By signing the Accords, you will be able to foster better cooperation between those four countries in the alliance in space technology, and it will also ease the other allies to know that they can act as part of the Artemis program without upsetting India. Meanwhile, you would argue that the impact is that the Quad alliance is crucial for deterring China. It's kind of like NATO to China and preventing space conflict. 10th and final pro argument area is all about technology access. You argue that India should sign the Artemis Accords to improve its access to the inventions and techniques of other signatory nations. In the status quo, India is technologically behind the other great powers like Russia, China, and the United States in its space sector, but by signing the Artemis Accords, India's space sector will gain access and cooperation to other countries that are part of the Accords and the program, their companies and their agencies' technology and techniques, which will help catch India's up to speed and increase cooperative innovation. Meanwhile, tech sharing spurs those innovations that will help improve people's lives. So now that we know why maybe India should sign the Artemis Accords, let's get into 10 arguments as to why India should not sign the Artemis Accords. So con arguments. So first con argument area is all about Chinese relations. This says that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to avoid hurting its relationship with the People's Republic of China. In the status quo, things aren't perfect, but India and China are definitely working on their relationship. But if India signs the Artemis Accords, that will anger and scare China. And India-China relations are essential to avoiding conflict between those two nations, as well as maintaining trade between those countries. Second con argument idea is all about climate change. It's pretty simple. It's the idea that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to prevent contributing to carbon emissions that stem from space travel. So in the status quo, India is really dedicated to reducing its contribution to climate change because India is uniquely at risk from climate change, and with so many people living in the country is also uniquely positioned to contribute or to take away from it. Meanwhile, if they sign the Artemis Accords, that will result in, as well as legitimize other nations increasing their outer space activity, which will cause climate change through space travel, specifically through the emission of black carbon. And the impact is that climate change will kill billions of people and cost trillions of dollars, disproportionately affecting India. Third argument idea is that we will trade off with domestic priorities. So India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to instead focus on solving its own domestic political priorities. So in the status quo, India, like any country, has several problems at home on Earth to focus on: poverty, infrastructure, human rights, etc. But if they sign the Artemis Accords, that will obligate India to increase focus and spending on outer space, which will trade off with its efforts to solve X issue, and X could really be anything that they're currently focusing on that requires a lot of resources and attention to fix. And the impact is that if we fail to fix X issue, then that will cause Y problem. The fourth con argument area is about economic inequality. So you will argue that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to avoid falling into the pitfall of the wealthy commercializing outer space. So this will also sound very familiar to the appropriating outer space topic, and that is, in the status quo, India is fighting to end poverty and reduce income inequality in their country as well as globally. But by signing the Artemis Accord, you involve India in the process of claiming and harvesting and profiting off of lunar resources and territory that's most likely only going to benefit the richest of the rich, the Elon Musks of the world. And the impact as to why we care is that income inequality is unjust and locks people into poverty and causes a whole bunch of other problems. Fifth is trading off with global solutions. So you argue that instead of signing the Artemis Accords, India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to instead push for global solutions that great powers can agree to. So this is more of a alternative advocacy, although in public forum, the proper language is a generalized solution because the con cannot read a counterplan. You argue that in the status quo, India is the largest spacefaring nation not to take a side so far between the China-Russia ILRS and the Artemis program with the US and its allies. But by signing the Accords, you are taking a side which pushes away the drive to get a global solution through the United Nations that can include US, China, Russia, and pretty much every other country in the world. The impact as to why the judge should care is that a global solution to lunar laws is essential to creating follow-through, consistency, legitimacy of those laws, as well as preventing conflict. Sixth con argument idea is that non-alignment is better, which will sound similar to the previous one, but it's different. And that is that signing the Artemis Accords is bad because it prevents India from maintaining its neutrality in relation to other great powers in outer space. So in the status quo, India is the largest spacefaring nation not to take a side between the two groups, but by signing the accords, India officially takes the United States side, which hurts its ability to cooperate with all parties and upsets China and Russia. Right now, India can play the field. It can be adaptable. It can go to different countries for its different needs. But if they take a side, then it's going to hurt its ability to focus on itself as well as focus on other countries that might be stronger than the US or other Artemis Accord nations in certain areas. Failing to remain neutral will trade off with India's own domestic priorities because they'll have to focus more on the collective agreement than on themselves. And it will also force them to avoid some partners, which is bad. Seventh con argument area is about Russian relations. This is very similar to the China relations argument from earlier, and that is that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to avoid hurting its relationships with the Russian Federation. Uniqueness, unlike China, where they haven't worked together in space all that often, India and Russia are historical allies and partners in outer space. Signing the Artemis Accords, on the other hand, would definitely anger Russia, and that's bad because India-Russian relations are crucial for India to get arms as well as oil, and their relationship in outer space is essential to Mars exploration because that's something that the two countries have been working on. Eighth argument area for the con is space conflict. You argue that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to prevent fighting over territory and resources in outer space. So currently, international space agreements prohibit or outlaw claiming sovereign territory and resource ownership at places like the moon. But by signing the Artemis Accords, they are joining a program which will lead to claiming ownership over territory and resources on the moon, which violates, those previous agreements, would definitely cause international conflict over those resources, especially with China and Russia, as well as other nations that have not joined the Artemis Accords. The impact is that international interstellar conflict would likely cost billions of dollars and cost countless lives. And none of that is something that India should seek to contribute to. Ninth con argument area is violating international law. India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to maintain its adherence to internationally recognized treaties and agreements. So in the status quo, India is following previously signed outer space treaties, but the Artemis Accords definitely violate several international agreements, such as the Outer Space Treaty and the Moon Agreement, and more. India signing the Artemis Accords also makes them more likely, or not more likely. India signing the Artemis Accords makes them violate international law while legitimizing the violations of other signatory nations. And violating international law is bad because it takes away the power of those laws, which makes conflict as well as future violations of those laws more likely. 10th and finally, this is a bit of a progressive argument for public forum, but I could definitely see people reading it and getting some success, and that is Western imperialism. You argue that India should refrain from signing the Artemis Accords to avoid playing into and being complicit in US-centric outer space policy. So right now, India is focusing on itself in outer space, as it should, but the Artemis Accords are founded in US imperialism, or the desire to spread its control and territory across the world, and the ideas within the Accords are very Western-centric. They will always put the needs of non-Western countries last, and India should not approve of this effort. And then your impact is just why imperialism is bad, and you can make it as specific or as general as you need to, with imperialism leading to inequality and oppression. So now that we've discussed 20 arguments, 10 for the resolution and 10 against, let's discuss some final thoughts. So 3 main things to keep in mind. Number 1, be careful with impacts. Try to make sure that your impacts are as specific and tangible as possible. How does India's signature or lack of a signature specifically cause or prevent a consequence from happening? What part of the issue is that going to contribute to it? Because chances are 100% of climate change is not going to be caused or solved by India joining the Artemis Accord. So make sure that you are very specific in how India contributes to or detracts from problems or solutions. Second of all is you have to do some reading on this topic. You have to read the literature. There's no substitution for that, specifically the Artemis Accords and the Outer Space Treaty documents themselves. Reading those is going to be crucial to understanding what you're talking about and making sure that you can answer questions well in cross-ex, as well as explaining yourself to judges that might not be as familiar as the topic as you are. Lastly, be sure to focus on India and not the United States. So most of our topics are United States centric. And even when it's an international topic, it's a US cooperating with other countries' specific topic. Since the judge is not making a decision on behalf of the United States, but rather on behalf of India, it's helpful to frame your understanding of the topic and of the impacts around the effects that joining or signing the Artemis Accords would have for India. So make sure not to be US centric in your understanding of the topic and in your writing of your impacts. With that being said, got to be honest, this is not my favorite topic that I've ever seen for public forum. I think PF has had a really rough year in terms of resolutions, and it only got worse as the season went on. But the good news is about having rough topics that it affects everyone equally. Everyone has to debate the same topic. So it's really going to come down to debatability on your end, as well as specific research and getting familiar with the literature. So I wish you all the best of luck, and I will see you in the next video.